Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
This is a joy. Charlie Clough, I think I first knew him at Colonial Management. This is ancient history.
Way back, yeah.
This is like
Boston.
John Hancock's house had just
Boston.
been torn down up on Tremont Street or wherever, up on the hill. Charlie Clough is definitive in Boston, definitive with Merrill Lynch, and definitive within all the equity business. We're honored that Chuck Clough would join us right now to get an update. Chuck, you've seen bull markets before. What's the character of this bull market?
Well, I think there are three factors playing roles here. Most important is inflation. The CPI inflation has declined from 9.1% back in 2022 to 2.4% today. And the personal consumption deflator, which is, we all know what the Fed looks at, that's running about 40 basis points below that, around 2%. So that's well within their target. There's a productivity boom going on. If you look at total weekly hours, they've been declining for the past 2 years, but the economy has grown, and that's productivity makes up the difference, and productivity means better profits. So our sense is that you've got a profit engine at the same time that inflation's been going in the right direction, and there is one third thing going on that a lot of people haven't picked up on. The private economy is generating cash, and that's unusual this late in a business cycle. Households are saving. I suspect it's baby boomers saving for retirement and making sure they can fund longer lifespans. But businesses are paying down debt. You can't go on a conference call where management isn't trying to pay down debt here, and that's creating somewhat of a liquidity surpluses. So businesses are earning more than they're investing, and households are earning more than they're investing as well. That means we've got a savings glut, and that's probably will likely push interest rates down.
Chuck, how do you feel about valuation here? We're getting into the thick of the earnings season here. How do you think about valuation in this market? We've had a nice move higher in the S&P 500 this year.
It's hard to time markets on the basis of valuation. I think with businesses generating free cash flow at the rate they are, I think valuation becomes less of a factor. Okay. If the private economy is throwing off excess cash, that's going to find its way into the capital market somehow.
Chuck, we've had a market for the longest time, many, many years, that's been led by technology. And now I guess the latest iteration of that, Chuck, is the AI. What sectors do you look to continue to move this market higher?
Well, AI is important, and quite frankly, I don't think the fangs are over. It's when you look at the cash flow that they generate and the growth that they have, it's not out of line at all. I mean, Google actually trades it below market multiple. So I sense that I think you want to stay there, but there are other things going on as well. Aerospace defense is an industry that's is coming on. Boeing's, of course, is wounded, but that makes Airbus all that more important. And thirdly, I think there's one area I would look at, and it crosses industries, but if we're right and the economy is generating cash, a lot of businesses were forced to take on a lot of debt when COVID basically closed everything down. As businesses generate cash and pay down that debt, that helps equities as well. So I think anybody who's deleveraging their balance sheet, the cruise lines stand out in that sense. There's an opportunity there as well.
Chuck Clough, I like to talk to people of a certain vintage. I think of Ed Hyman, Ed Yardeni, of course, Ed, incredibly bullish. Let us go back, Chuck Clough, to the Nifty 50, the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company. Let's see, what else? Black & Decker, Eastman Kodak, Hublot, Xerox, Xerox, names from another time and place. Chuck Clough on the Nifty 7. What's going to become of them? Are they the next Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company?
Well, I think what happened, two things happened to the Nifty 50. One was, of course, that they were very very high multiples, up in the 50s sometimes, certainly 35 to 50 times earnings. But secondly, they stopped growing. And I think that was the engine that came into part. The same thing with the dot-com boom. That was basically supported by a debt boom, tremendous overinvestment. And of course, as earnings collapsed, so did the values there. I think the AI situation is quite different. These are companies with tremendous platforms. When you look at companies like Microsoft, for example, the only company that survived the dot-com boom and continued to dominate was Microsoft. Of course, Google and Amazon came on in the aughts, but they made all of the transitions necessary as technology changes. They captured the cloud. They captured AI. That's a dramatic difference between these earlier cycles. So I still think they're alive.
Yeah. Chuck, within the productivity boom you mentioned, do you ascribe to Ed Yardeni's Roaring 20s? Can you take a vector and run it out 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and come up with big SPX and big Dow Jones industrial average numbers?
I think you can, and the reason I say that is there are three factors that. But let's look at the events that created 40 years of declining interest rates and declining inflation. And of course, that was interrupted by COVID and the tremendous government response to that. But those three factors were, one, demographics. As people age, they get older. We've seen that in Japan for 30 years, and we started seeing that in Europe in the early teens, and now we're seeing it in the United States, where we are seeing the baby boomers retire. And once you retire, you stop spending. You don't buy houses. You don't buy cars. So that's one of the reasons why we think we're beginning to see a net savings balance in the household sector. And of course, that'll only pick up as the baby boomers really do retire. The second thing, of course, is where balance sheets are. Private debt is still 150% of GDP. And that means as interest rates do go up, it slows down spending. We're seeing that in credit cards. And then thirdly, there's technology, which of course is booming today. It's the one investment cycle we have. You put those three things together, they only become more intense as we go through the rest of the decade. So I wouldn't give up on financial assets yet.
For those of you younger, listening on your commute across this nation, around the world, good evening in the Pacific Rim, and on YouTube, the cadence you're hearing from one Charles Clough is like the old days, Paul. It wasn't rushed and frantic. No. It was just, here's the three reasons we believe.
Take your time.
There's a cadence, a pace here we treasure.
Chuck, what is the risk to this market here? I mean, I step back and I look at the S&P 500 up 20% year to date, and that was kind of in a blink of an eye. Is the risk here maybe the Federal Reserve makes a misstep? What concerns you out there?
I would say, well, of course, on the geopolitical front, there's more moving targets than you can really assess. But I would say that would be the most important factor. The Fed over tightening in a period. I think the risk for that is lower than it was in the past. Remember, the Fed still has a $7 trillion balance sheet, and it looks like they're likely to stop there, and that gives them an awful lot of resources to handle any kind of liquidity event that might occur. And the second is our financial sector is heavily overcapitalized. So it's an environment we've never really looked at before. The financial sector is overcapitalized at the same time that the household and corporate sectors are saving. That creates a liquidity. I would say the biggest risk that investors might look at over the years ahead is yield shortage will be back. Look at how triple Bs are nearing the treasury rate. It's going to be harder and harder to find yield. And eventually that will hit the short end of the curve as well.
Charlie Clough, thank you so much. Channeling Sir John Templeton there at the end. Templeton once said to me, Tom, there will be a shortage of bonds. Charles Clough, legendary, of course, great to have him on, always associated with Merrill Lynch.
Yep. You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
We get wisdom from Jennifer Lawless. She's at UVA, outstanding on the politics of the American system. Jennifer Lawless, as you look at the campaign now 3 weeks out, what does Mr. Trump have to accomplish today at the Economic Club of Chicago?
I think Donald Trump has to make it clear to business people that he can only win the election if he focuses on the economy and if they do everything they can to act as surrogates for him. He's had a very hard time staying on message. He's had a very hard time convincing people that he has the discipline to be president again. And so this is a final shot to get people who are in that industry to make his argument.
No surprise, we had Simon Johnson on yesterday, the newly minted Nobel Prize winner, and he knows I'm going to give him the question at the end of the conversation. And I asked Professor Johnson about tariffs, and he went mental like anyone at Darden or UVA would, and just went nuts. Who out there is supporting President Trump in any tariffs, let alone sizable tariffs?
People who don't know what tariffs are. If anything, this election has made it very clear that the two sides are talking past each other, that the Republicans have managed to suggest to the American public quite successfully that fact-checking is partisan, and that allows Donald Trump to call a tariff anything that he wants and not take into account the fact that it really is a tax on the American people.
Jennifer, is the economic message for the Donald Trump and his campaign primarily or simply tax cuts? Is that kind of where they base most of their economic call?
That's the plan. It's unclear that he would be able to get them through, but that is the plan. But the other piece of the message is that the Biden economy didn't work and Kamala Harris is responsible for it. And those metrics just don't play out. The evidence isn't there for it. But inflation, even though it's at the lowest rate that it's been in 4 years, is still inflation, and people still feel it in their pockets. And the Democrats haven't fully figured out how to thread that needle.
Is he going to veer off economics today at the Economic Club of New York? I mean, given the cadence and patterns supporters of Mr. Trump and those against Mr. Trump have seen over the last number of weeks, is his basic economic strategy to not talk about economics?
If I were a betting woman, I would suggest that there will be a lot about immigration in the speech. The minute he mentions the economy, he doesn't seem like he can pull himself away from talking about illegal border crossings and perpetuating myths about what immigrants have done to the economy. It's not only immigration.
Whoa, that's important. Professor Lawless, what have immigrants, legal and not legal, done to the economy?
They've actually allowed it to grow and thrive. Donald Trump wants to make an argument that immigration has taken away Americans' jobs. But I think what a lot of people don't seem to realize, and the message that the Harris campaign is trying to make clear, is that there are a lot of jobs out there that people need done. And the immigrants are the backbone of this economy.
Lisa, Paul Sweeney, we live this every day in a cosmopolitan New York. Walk X number of blocks, north, south, down any street in New York, and tell me that many of those immigrant jobs, they're only being filled because of immigrants.
It's been that way since the beginning of this country. I don't know why today would be any different. Jennifer, 21 days roughly to the election. Is there anything that can move the needle one way or the other? Because it just feels like it's so tight and both sides are so entrenched.
It's hard to imagine any big event or what we used to call an October surprise, largely because people have already started voting. It seems like with only about 4% of people saying that they're undecided, this is now officially a turnout election. And so when Kamala Harris goes on Fox News and makes her case to Republicans who might have supported Nikki Haley, that could matter. When Donald Trump goes on Joe Rogan's podcast and tries to get a sliver of black men to vote for him, that could matter. These aren't big shocks to the system. This is really just about the margins.
In a get out the vote scenario where turnout is going to be key here, does that favor either side at this point typically?
Typically, not necessarily. In 2020, it certainly did because the Democrats had a very, very clear mail-in ballot strategy. They do again this time around. The Republicans aren't as opposed to early voting and absentee ballots as they were in the past. We'll see if that message has trickled down to their voters. But my hunch is that, similar to previous elections, the country is really, really split, and both sides are going to do everything they can to turn out their voters. Let's
go to your wheelhouse, the study of women in politics as well. Here's a bold question that came up to the dining room table last night. Jennifer Lawless, can a woman be elected president in America?
Absolutely. I think it's important to keep in mind that although Hillary Clinton lost the electoral vote, and that's how we elect presidents, she did win the popular vote. So more people cast ballots for her than they did Donald Trump. They just didn't live in the right places. Kamala Harris is doing everything she can not to repeat the mistakes of the Clinton campaign. And if we look at the polling, it's pretty difficult to imagine a scenario whereby Harris doesn't win the popular vote by several million. Whether that translates into an electoral margin is an open question. But people are willing to cast ballots for women, and they have been down ballot for decades.
Jennifer, thank you so much. Professor Lawless at the University of Virginia.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
This is by chance. I've been efforting for the last number of days with Eric. Mark Kimmitt. He is a retired Brigadier General. He enjoyed the Army when it was most unpopular after Vietnam as a battery executive officer at Camp Stanley in Korea. He has distinguished academics in finance as well, as a chartered financial analyst. And we have him here by chance on a day where our John Micklethwaite will speak with Donald Trump, presidential candidate and former president. We'll ask some delicate questions of General Kimmitt. I'm not going to mince words, General Kimmitt, and this course goes with our conversations with Admiral Stavridis, Ben Hodges, and others. John Kelly has come out and said some terse comments about President Trump. General Miley in the new Woodward Burke with terse comments about the president. If Donald Trump is reelected, Mark Kimmitt, how does he form a defense establishment with that kind of accolade from his former employees? How does he form, as commander-in-chief, his next defense administration?
Well, Tom, the fact remains is that you've got a lot of people that object to President Trump in terms of his character and what they believe to be his competence. But I'm sure that there is many who have not stood up and said, I would vote and I would work for President Trump, because in many ways, the invective alone that would be sent and directed to those people just means that it's not worth saying that now. So I suspect there are a lot of good people out there that would work for President Trump. I would remind your audience that when we were in uniform, we were told to serve whoever was the president. And I certainly hope out of the uniform that people will do the same.
General Kimmitt, you and I had a blistering conversation, I'm going to say 3 years ago, I'm guessing, on your greatest fear, which is combat within cities. We've lived that in Ukraine, no question about it. Maybe less so in Israel, but the level of combat, the nature of combat on the Lebanese border, how is that different than what we see in Ukraine?
Well, I think it's more comparable to the difference between what we see in Gaza. Gaza was city fighting inch by inch, block by block, house by house. Lebanon is more of a maneuver war, even though it may not look that. The Israeli army is trying to take land, and it's trying to find underground subterranean missile platforms more than they are trying to actually go against terrorists. Everybody knows that Hezbollah has lost its top 5 tiers of leadership. So it's not really an extremely effective fighting force anymore as a large organization. The great threat to Israel is those missiles. Israel wants to get its people back into the north, back to their houses, and they can't do that without taking the Hezbollah rockets. And for the most part, those rockets and missiles are south of the Litani. And so it's more of a maneuver sweep operation inside of Lebanon right now, where it was true city fighting inside of Gaza.
So, General, with that background, how do you believe the Israelis will retaliate against Iran? Because that's kind of, I think, the next step for a lot of observers.
Sure. It's actually pretty clear on how. The real question is when. I just got off of an Israeli station where we were having that conversation. They've taken off the target menu oil installations and nuclear facilities, probably for many, many good reasons, as well as political reasons to take some pressure off the Harris campaign. But that menu still has a whole lot of entrees on it. You can go against infrastructure, you can go against military targets, you can do inside of Iran, continue what you've been doing inside of Iran, which is targeted assassinations. The purpose in the mind of Netanyahu is not to defeat or destroy, but is to reestablish deterrence against Iran so that Iran knows that if it ever does attack Israel again, the pain that will be inflicted upon them will be so harsh as to deter them from doing that. That's what he's trying to do. He's not trying to take land. He's not trying to destroy. He's not trying to defeat. He simply wants to set up a deterrence structure that had held since '79 and had been breached in the last year.
General, while we have you on, we must ask you about your thoughts on the Ukraine. Sometimes it gets a little bit lost here in the headlines coming out of the Middle East here.
It really has.
It has. And how do you think this plays out, General, over the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Is that the time frame?
Well, two things. Let me do a little self-promotion. I'm doing a videotaping tomorrow for the Wall Street Journal, as I have done a number of times, on the state of the war inside of Ukraine. 2 years ago, 2+ years ago, about 3 months into the war starting, I wrote an article for Wall Street Journal saying that this war was going to turn into a bloody stalemate, and that's exactly what's happened. There's not going to be a whole lot of maneuver on the ground. There should not be, and unlikely there will be any breakthroughs. And now we're getting into the muddy season where there will be very little maneuver as well. So I think we've got to accept the fact that Russia and in general, and Putin in particular, are making this a war of exhaustion on Ukraine. Ukraine is running out of troops. Ukraine is running out of equipment. Russia is not. So at some point in time, it would be wise for Zelensky to start looking at what his negotiations options are, since the military options seem to be coming to an end.
General Kimmitt, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. Mark Kimmitt there, and look for his work for the Wall Street Journal with the update on Ukraine.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.
Flew in from Los Angeles, BOAC, Lisa Mateo here with the newspapers. Lisa, what do you have?
All right. More people have been talking to chatbots nowadays, right? So it's becoming like normal conversation. So the dilemma now is AI etiquette. Should you be polite to your chatbot? So, for example, if it helps you, do you say thank you? If it doesn't, do you say not nice words to it? Or is it just transactional and you say nothing? So this is becoming a really big conversation on social media. There's a debate whether bots are also keeping tabs on who is nice to them, because research actually shows that if you give an impolite prompt, it may lead to increased bias. It may not even answer your question.
Well, for those of us clueless,
yes.
What's a chatbot?
So if you're talking to, let's say, like ChatGPT or something, or if you're, let's say, Siri? Online with anyone, with one of those AI assistants that you see somewhere, let's say at your bank or anywhere. Yes.
Ken Foley will help me here. What's the thingy here? You got an app on your phone, a QR code?
A QR code? No, that's different.
Now there's a scam where people are putting stickers over them to take your money.
Oh,
do you trust chatbots? Do you trust this new digital world? Lisa, do you trust it?
It's because I've put questions into ChatGPT and then I fact check it. And then it's not right. So it's
Where's
tough.
ChatGPT? Is it in like section 3 of the newspaper?
I don't know.
have
Matt
no
Miller
idea.
loves it.
Really?
Yeah. Well, he's on the cutting edge.
He's you have to you have to do your research and double fact check everything.
I think we should always
when
be
you put it
polite
through there.
in all our interactions.
But be polite. Okay, there you go.
Real and digital. Why not?
Yeah, I'm polite.
What's the downside?
AI etiquette. Who knew?
right.
Next.
Okay. Financial Times is saying Jane Street interns make more than Keir Starmer and Jay Powell. Okay, so they took a look at interns. Okay, this is some of Jane Street's current job postings. Quantitative research internship in New York doesn't even require finance industry experience. An annualized base salary of $250,000. Also adds for software engineering internship, machine learning researcher summer gig pays $250,000 a year as well.
Yep.
So they put into context. They say Prime Minister Keir Starmer currently paid about $224,000. Jay Powell approximately $203,000. So they're just kind of putting this into perspective here.
Post-pandemic, this is a huge deal. Huge. I'm glad you did this, Lisa. Post-pandemic, there are wage discrepancies, like in accounting.
Correct.
It's comedic how underpaid accountants are right now. And you're seeing this, and they're readjusting to find where the market is. That's what it takes to get some of these bright people. Somebody was complaining yesterday about what they have to pay economists at schools. That's the run rate.
Right.
You don't get these kids out of, name the school, Chicago, Stanford, whatever. The starting is 200 XX.
22,500 at my first job at Payne Weber, 1986.
Mine-
And I lived like a king, by the way, in the city.
Well, that's the thing. Can you
In the
live like a
city?
king now
No. I don't
in New
know.
York City on
cannot.
140,000 right now in New
Yeah,
York City?
I know. I
Single,
know.
and you got to dress decently at work.
Yeah.
Those Patagonias are expensive.
Exactly.
You can say that again. Okay, so New York
Katie
City.
Kaminsky's laughing. I see you up here, Katie. Katie's prepared. Katie knows there's no one in Alpha Simplex that's not wearing a Patagonia.
I know.
Next.
There you go. New York City restaurants, they have this big challenge now. Okay, Gen Z doesn't know what happy hour is.
This is sad.
Okay, yeah, it's very sad. Okay.
Are you doing this because I'm going to Rome?
No. The Post had an interview with the co-founder of Catch Hospitality. So he said the pandemic changed everything, right?
Okay.
People used to the 9 to 5 at 5:01. Yeah,
Sure.
you're happy, right?
Yep.
Okay, but now the hours have changed. So people are not working the same hours. They're working from home. Everything's changed. Gen Z is also drinking less. So now these restaurateurs were paying exorbitant amounts of rent.
Rent, right.
And their staff. So they're now dealing with this. So they have like non-alcoholic menus. Some are deciding to move to Dallas, Miami. Like it's changing the whole landscape of how they have to do things.
You can feel it. It's in real time.
Well, I got a happy hour drink before dinner last night in the city. Brass Monkey downtown. I haven't been there in 100
My
years.
word.
Boom. It was like I never left.
But what's a happy hour price now?
I don't know. I
Is
just
it-
kind
see-
of I threw it in my cart. I had a couple of cocktails and went to dinner. I mean, I don't worry about it. But
It's worth it.
But there were people there. There were young folks there popping in around.
Yes, but what they're starting to do is increase the food price to compensate for that.
Yeah.
So that's
yeah,
going to be a change.
but is Wednesday or Thursday? Folks, email it on YouTube.
When is
live
happy
chat.
hour?
Let us know. Is Thursday or Wednesday the new Friday? I think it's a really important
Well, here's the thing.
That's true.
I've
That's
noticed
true.
that the traffic down to the Jersey Shore on Thursday afternoon is what it used to be Friday.
Yeah,
People are just
exactly.
not
So
working
people are not
Fridays.
working Fridays.
Yeah, so Thursday's a new Friday.
Okay, you got
That's
one
what
more?
it is. One more.
Squeeze it in.
Okay. New report says U.S. calorie intake could reduce by trillions by 2030 because of the popular weight loss drugs. So there was a study that came out that showed this. GLP drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, they're starting to change how people eat. People want to eat healthier options, less processed food. They base this on grocery sales, but they're saying it's going to change how grocers actually stock and lay out the whole grocery store. So your store will start to look different after a while, as people start to eat healthier, eat less. So that's the whole point of this survey, is showing how the landscape of the grocery store is changing.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. The newspapers today.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.